Hey guys, Toby from school here. Hope you're safe and well wherever you are. So today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at writing, and we're going to be looking at the way in which writers can control the reader. But before we begin, I just wanted to give you a small commentary on what was happening outside. It's a ruse really, because I know that perhaps we're not all there right at the beginning of these sessions. Outside I can see some grey sky, a little bit of rain, and it does all look a bit bleary. But hopefully, the sun will come out this afternoon, or or even later in the week, and that will bring us all some joy. So, okay. So today, guys, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at the way in which writers control the reader, the way in which writers can make the reader feel certain emotions and make the reader start and stop and almost imitate the action in stories. So the first thing that I'd like you to do is I'd like you just to take a quick look at this painting. So this painting is a Rothko, and I wonder, what does this make you think? When you look at this, what does it make you think? What even does it make you feel when you look at it? I was shown this picture many times as a trainee teacher, and it was designed to help students, young people, see different elements of stories. What do you see when you look at it? How many different colours do you see? So if you can you write that in the chat? And we're going to move on now, and we're going to focus specifically on how we make readers feel. So when you're doing your tasks at school, when you're writing, I want you to remember that even though you're not a professional writer, when you hold that pen and when you type on that keyboard, you are a writer, and it's your job really to make the reader feel it, see it, and turn the page. And today we're going to focus on two elements of writing. One element is how you can manipulate and control the way somebody feels. An amazing thing about writing is that when you have a really good book or a good piece of writing, that somewhere is controlling a reader. So Roald Dahl wrote this, as I've talked about, and he wrote it many years ago. And when I read it, I am feeling something. It's an amazing magic trick, really. Roald Dahl writes the word, and years later, somewhere else completely, the reader feels the word. So the writer has this great power to make the reader feel things, and we're going to look at how he does that in two distinct ways. So today's lesson is all about how writers make readers feel. How writers make readers feel. So again, it's just worth mentioning that text is just black and white on the page. The stories are an artifice in some senses. That means they're kind of not real. They're constructed of black and white shapes. And as readers, our job is to make those shapes into stories and ideas. And the better the writer, the better those stories and ideas will be. So we're going to be talking today about how writing can make readers feel. Okay, so let's see, what have we got here? So Chloe here has said, the picture makes me think of rain out of a window. Yeah, that's an amazing reading. The picture makes me think of rain out of a window. So all art is designed to make us think and feel. Some is quite abstract. This is abstract art, And our reading of it is up to us. It's a very subjective thing. We look at that art and we feel a certain way. And it's a lovely reading there, Chloe. The picture makes me think of rain out of a window. The same is true of all art, whether it's music or whether it is literature, as we're going to be looking at today. So, I wonder how Rothko makes us feel. I wonder how Rothko made Chloe think that the picture makes her imagine rain out of a window. Just before we go on, I wonder if you could just write down how many different colours you can see in this picture of Rothko's, this painting. How many different colours are there? I'll reveal the purpose of that a little bit later. But just write in the chat how many different colours this picture makes you, how many different colours are in the picture. Okay. So we're going to go back to Roald Dahl today, which is a good starting place. He's a really good writer. Roald Dahl, of course, wrote many children's stories, but also wrote a great many works of fiction for adults. He's a very controlled and seasoned writer, and we're going to be looking at a story from Going Solo again. This story is set in the Second World War, at the beginning of the Second World War, where Roald Dahl, who has just trained to become a pilot, is navigating his way across the desert in effectively his first solo journey. So he's stationed in North Africa. It's pretty much at the beginning of the war, 1940, and he is in one of these planes, a Gladiator, and it's his first solo voyage in this plane. So he's got his wings. He's a fighter pilot, and he's been asked to take this plane effectively at point A to point B in the desert, and it's his first solo trip. So what we're going to be doing is I'm going to read this story to you, and what I'd like you to do is, Chloe, yeah, fantastic. I'll come back to you in a second. What I'd like you to do is write down in the chat, so there's a few tasks in the chat today, how panic words, that's what I'm after. I'm after panic words. Think of all the words that you can think of that are associated with panic and write them in the chat as I read. So we're joining Roald Dahl for this flight in his Gloucester Gladiator across the desert. And while I read that, I'd like you to write all the associated words with panic that you can, panic words. The flight in itself was a fairly daunting one for someone who had virtually no experience of the aircraft he was flying, and none at all of flying long distances over Egypt and Libya with no navigational aids to help him. I had no radio. All I had was a map strapped to one knee. It took me 1 hour exactly to get me from Abu Suir to Amiria, where I landed with some difficulty in a sandstorm. But I got my plane refueled and set off as quickly as I could. I landed 55 minutes later and reported to the CO in his tent. He made some calls on his field telephone and then asked me for my map. 8 Squadron are now there, he said, pointing to a spot in the middle of the desert about 30 miles due south of the small coastal town of Messamira. Will it be easy to see? I asked him. You can't miss it, he said. You'll see the tents and about 15 gladiators parked outside the place. You can spot it from miles away. I thanked him and went off to calculate my course and distance. The time was 6:15. When I took off from the airfield there, I estimated my flight time to be 50 minutes at the most. That would give me 15 or 20 minutes to spare before darkness fell, which should be enough. I flew straight for the point where the 80 Squadron airfield should have been. It wasn't there. I flew around the area to north, south, east and west, but there was not a sign of an airfield. Below me there was nothing but empty desert, and rather ragged desert at that, full of large stones and boulders and gullies. At this point dusk began to fall, and I realised that I was in trouble. My fuel was running low, and there was no way I could get back to the airfield and what I had left. I could have found it in the dark anyway. I couldn't have found it in the dark anyway. The only course open to me now was to make a forced landing in the desert and make it quickly, before it was too dark to see. I skimmed low over the boulder-strewn desert, searching for just one small strip of reasonably flat sand on which to land. I knew the direction of the wind, so I knew precisely the direction the approach should take. But where, oh where, was there one little patch of desert that was clear of boulders and gullies and lumps of rock? There simply wasn't one. It was nearly dark now. I had to get down somehow or other. I chose a piece of ground that seemed to me to be as boulder-free as any, and I made an approach. I came in as slowly as I dared, hanging on the propeller, travelling just above my stalling speed of 80 miles an hour. My wheels touched down. I throttled back and prayed for a bit of luck. I didn't get it. My undercarriage hit a boulder and collapsed completely, and the Gladiator buried its nose in the sand at what must have been about 75 miles an hour. My injuries in that bust-up came from my head being thrown forward violently against the reflector slide. And apart from the skull fracture, the blow pushed my nose in and knocked a few front teeth out and blinded me completely for days to come. That story is real. It did certainly happen, and Roald Dahl spent many weeks in hospital. It was a terrible air disaster, one he was very lucky to escape from alive. So today's lesson is all about how writers make us feel. And here we have our intrepid RAF flying ace, Roald Dahl, in his Gloucester Gladiator, flying across the desert. There's something about that story that is full of panic. And I asked you, quite cheekily, to write some panic words in the chat. We've got a few here. So we've got daunting from Luena, difficulty, trouble, prayed violently we have here as well. So all of these words tell us of the struggle and the panic. We can well imagine Roald Dahl there in his aeroplane, terrified that he can't find a place to land and he can't see where he's supposed to land, and he is full of panic. And this is very much the sense that Roald Dahl wants to convey. So if in your writing you want to convey panic words such as daunting, difficulty, trouble, violently, I do not want you to use. I want you to create a story full of panic. That will be the task at the end of today. But I don't want you to use any of the words that are associated with panic. You must not use panic. You must not use difficulty. I don't want you to use violently, even though it's an amazing word. Daunting is a wonderful word, but you must not use it. I wonder why. Why do you think you should not use words like panic? I want you to think about creating a story full of panic, but you must not use words like panic. And this is the trick. In Roald Dahl's story, he does not use the word panic. In fact, he keeps his panic words to a minimum. I wonder why. Why does Roald Dahl not use panic words in his story full of panic? So I'd like you, please, to have a think about that and write that in the chat. Why does he not use panic words? It's a story full of panic. I'm no pilot, but I can imagine it being absolutely terrifying, flying over the desert as a novice fighter pilot, not knowing where to land, and knowing, of course, that I was strapped into a plane that would catch fire, as actually his did, and almost killed him if I landed badly. That's fantastic, Chloe, yes. The reason, and Luena, that's fantastic. So Luena said, to show, not tell. When we want to make the reader feel, we've got to create the conditions of that panic. We've got to show them what panic is like, not tell them. If Roald Dahl says, I was panicked, the word doesn't do much. Not really, I was panicked. It doesn't make me feel panicked. But if you create the atmosphere, create the panic, the reader will feel it. And the way to do that is to not use panic words. Again, yes, that's right, Chloe, to make you feel the panic. So here is the rule of thumb for creative writing. And as I said before, I went back to university to study creative writing, and I spent 2.5 years learning that you must not use, if you want the reader to feel something, avoid using the abstract nouns. Avoid using words like fear and panic and associated words. If you want the reader to feel something, create the conditions, create the atmosphere. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at the techniques that Roald Dahl has employed to make us feel the panic. And he's done a couple. One that we know about, that's the avoiding using abstract nouns, and we'll talk about that in a second. And another is a little bit more specialised. Today's session is all about how writers can control the way readers feel. And it's an amazing connection. I sometimes really enjoy reading books that are pretty big and old, actually. This book was written, I think, in the 1850s. And, I've read this book in recent years and really been moved by it and really felt what the writer wanted us to feel. So if you want the reader to feel something, don't use abstract nouns. Create the conditions. Okay, so let's have a look at the text in a bit more detail. So here we have Roald Dahl flying over the desert. I flew straight for the point where the 80 Squadron airfield should have been. It wasn't there. I flew around the area to north, south, east and west, but there was not a sign of an airfield. Below me there was nothing but empty desert, and rather rugged desert at that, full of large stones and boulders and gullies. Well, here, what can we spot? Well, we can certainly spot there are no panic words. But which part of this make us feel panic? How does he show that panic? Which words make us think of panic? Okay, while you do that, we're going to have a look at another technique that he's using in this throughout this story. So in that short extract, have a look and see which words make us feel panic. So let's have another look. So here Chloe said, it wasn't there. Empty desert. Yeah, that's very good. What's amazing about these two little sentences, empty desert and it wasn't there, we don't think that these words suddenly induce fear and panic. But in this story, in this context, they do. There is another technique that he uses, and I think it was probably picked up by Chloe here, and that's the use of the short sentence, it wasn't there. It's very powerful, it's coming after a much longer sentence. We've got this modal word here, this should, Luena said. The fact that it's not there, it should have been there but wasn't. That's really good. This word, that's a really clever point actually, Luena. This word should draws our attention to the fact that to something that isn't there. And it's always what isn't there which induces the most fear and panic, isn't it? The thing that is unknown, the thing that is hidden. That's a really clever thing to pick up on there, Luena. Very well done. So back to the extract here. We've got that short sentence there. It wasn't there. And then this next sentence here. I flew around the area to north, south, east and west, but there was not a sign of an airfield. This list is really effective too. It's almost as if we are just like Roald, looking around for that place to land. So it's interesting that the first thing that we go to when we start writing creatively, we start writing our stories, is we try and pull this vocabulary together, panic words. It's perhaps what we did when we were at primary school. What words are horrifying? What words are scary? What words make us feel fear? And then we employ them in our writing. And I think that's a mistake. These are great words in and of their own. But if you're trying to make the reader feel something, don't give the game away. Try and avoid using these fear words. The task today, if you'd like to do it, the homework task is to write this story, to rewrite this story of Roald Dahl's, stealing as much as you like, but remembering to avoid using abstract nouns and doing this technique that I'm going to be showing you in a few seconds. So here we've got that short sentence, and we've also got that list. So lists can create real energy. Now we've got the end of the passage. I'd like you, please, to have a look at the shorter sentences here. So he uses them throughout. So I skimmed low over the boulder-strewn desert, searching for just one small strip of reasonably flat sand on which to land. So that's obviously quite a long sentence, that first one. And that's playing its part too. Remember, Roald Dahl is flying in that plane. He's looking for that place to land. And I imagine his experience is both that searching, long experience, that flying over where to land, and then that short dynamic. Is it there? Is it there? The writing here is trying to imitate the action. The best writers in the world try to imitate the feeling. Let's have another look. I skimmed low over the boulder-strewn desert, searching for just one small strip of reasonably flat sand on which to land. I knew the direction of the wind, so I knew precisely the direction that my approach should take. Again, long sentences. There's a drawn-out sense here. But where, oh where, was there one little patch of desert that was clear of boulders and gullies and lumps of rock? There's a clever little additional thing that he's done there, of boulders and gullies and lumps of rock. That's a particular kind of list, but it really emphasises that there's no special place to land. What else have we got here? Okay. There simply wasn't one. That short sentence. Again, that's a really punchy short sentence. Where else is it? There we are. It was nearly dark now. These two short sentences back to back. They're dramatic. They're emphasising the suddenness of what's going on. In his writing, Roald Dahl is imitating the experience. He's trying to make us feel in our chests what it must have been like. Those long moments, and then those sudden urgent, dramatic moments. I had to get down somehow or other. Again, another short sentence. Now we've got a long one. I chose a piece of ground that seemed to me to be as boulder-free as any, and I made an approach. Short sentence. I came in as slowly as I dared. Or rather, it's not a short sentence. This is actually a complex sentence, but this sentence does something amazing. So, the Gladiator, this quite early World War II plane, has a propeller at the front. And this propeller and planes like it have a stalling speed where if they go slow enough, the engine stalls and cuts out. So have a think about the engine cutting out and the structure of the sentences as you hear. Okay. I came in as slowly as I dared, hanging on the prop, travelling just above my stalling speed of 80 miles an hour. My wheels touched down. I throttled back and prayed for a bit of luck. New paragraph. I didn't get it. Can you see those last few lines of that first paragraph are stalling, like they're stopping and starting? And that first sentence of that second paragraph with that very powerful, I didn't get it. In the story, Roald Dahl's plane is stalling. it's stopping and starting. And the sentences are stopping and starting. The writer is using sentences to make us feel. He's using sentence types to make us feel. And this is something that is really, really important and incredibly powerful when you incorporate this in your writing. There are two things Roald Dahl is doing in this story, which I think are amazing. He's not using abstract nouns. He's making us feel by using words like should and empty and desert. He's not using words like panic. And the other way he's doing it is by using sentence types. Now, if I said, without any of this lesson, I said, right, what are the ingredients of an amazing story that's full of drama and excitement? I doubt you would say using sentence types. But actually, using sentence types is so essential and so important. So hanging on the prop, Chloe, what that means is hanging on the propeller. So it's an aeronautical flying term, but he's waiting on the propeller, holding on as if it's the only thing that's going to keep him on the air. It's an aeronautical term. But its function in this sentence, rather than what it means, is to seem like the engine is stalling. I came in as slowly as I dared, hanging on the prop, travelling just above my stalling speed of 80 miles an hour. This sentence, sometimes in language, there are words that we don't understand. I mean, certainly reading that old book that I picked up a minute ago, there are lots of words in that I don't understand. But we're enabled sense and understanding through a variety of techniques. Essential in that sentence is how that sentence has got those three parts. There are long bits and short bits, and they almost imitate that plane sort of stalling, the engine cutting out. Okay, fantastic. So we're going to look at sentence types here. Sentence types are essential. And when you're writing, the absolute ideal is to know the types of sentence that you're going to write before you write them down. And if you use sentences in the way that Roald Dahl has done, those short, simple sentences, perhaps even using lists, your writing is going to become much more mature, much more controlled, and above all, you're going to be able to control the reader. So it's all about controlling the reader today. We control the reader through our structural choices. Structure, sentences sound boring, but actually you can use them in really dynamic ways and they'll make the reader feel. And if you write really well, they'll make the reader feel like they are there. So let's have a look at it. The simple sentence. So these are my definitions, but they're good enough. So the simple sentence, think about it, and it might be worth you taking a pen and writing these down. Simple sentences are one thing happening or one thing being described. And here are some of Roald Dahl's examples here. My wheels touched down, or it was nearly dark now. The simple sentences are the most powerful sentence in my opinion. And, we're looking at Roald Dahl's story, and Roald Dahl's story is written for all people. I bought my dad a copy of this text for his birthday last year, and he is 70 years young. So it's a book written for all, but even in horror stories that are written specifically for adults, really adult fiction, these short sentences are used and are very, very powerful. So make sure that you know what they are. They are sentences where one thing is happening or where one thing is being described. They are dramatic, they create shock, and they also show the reader that you are in control. They are a power sentence. They've got that one thing happening or that one thing being described, that very strong full stop at the end frequently. And make sure you use that in your writing. This is the power sentence. And it's very, very important. The sentence that I'm always wary of is the compound sentence, and I tend not to teach that one. That's when you join two clauses with a conjunction, like and, which, as I'm sure you're aware, can go on and on and on. But if you think in terms of using simple sentences, your writing is going to become controlled. Next up is the list. So lists arrest the senses. That means it's like bombarding you with ideas. So when you take that shopping list around the shops, when you do eventually go to the shops, if you were to read all those items suddenly in a sentence, it would sound overwhelming. So lists in sentences can overwhelm and can arrest the senses. Here we've got, I flew around the area to the north, south, east and west, but there was not a sign of an airfield. That list in the middle of the sentence is there to add emphasis and to stress that there's the character in the story, Roald, is being overwhelmed. So if you want to overwhelm the reader, then create a list. So right at the beginning we talked about not using abstract nouns, and then we looked at a passage, and Luana and Chloe, you said there are words like empty desert and should. They don't sound like panic, but they make the reader feel it. So in your lists, you could use words that don't sound like panic words, but add that emphasis of panic. Here, Roald Dahl is using, north, south, east, west to stress that there's nowhere for him to land. What other lists could you use in your story to stress that there's nowhere to land? And the last is a little bit more complicated. This is a conditional, a really powerful sentence. So Roald Dahl in his story says, the only course open to me now was to make a forced landing in the desert and make it quickly before it was too dark to see. So you can see the sentence has got these two clauses. The clause at the beginning with the only, and the clause at the end, beginning with before. So this is a little more technical, but it's something that we're going to be working on over time. It's a very important, complex sentence, and I'd like you to start using it in your writing. So going back to it now. So I prefer actually it written the way it is at the bottom. Before it was too dark to see. I'm sorry, Roald, I've changed your sentence, but I'd rather you wrote yours a little bit like this. Before it was too dark to see, the only course open to me now was to make a forced landing in the desert and make it quickly. Here, in conditionals, one thing happens as a result of something else. Things happen as a result of other things. This sentence makes us think about an action and a reaction. So it's a way of a sentence showing causality, like things happening as a result. And it's a perfect sentence type if you want to create drama and fear. Let's show you a different way of looking at it. So you start with that subordinating conjunction. In the left hand of the screen there, you've got before, as, when, because, if. And these are subordinating conjunctions. Use these words at the beginning of your sentence. So before, as, if, because. Before it was too dark to see, the only course open to me now was to make a forced landing in the desert and make it quickly. So you can see you've got that very clear structure. You begin with that subordinating word, and then you've got that resulting action. Because I love chocolate, I eat too much. So something happens as a result of something else. When I walk out in the rain, I get wet. I know this sounds kind of simple, but it's a really, really powerful sentence to use that shows cause and effect. You've got something happening, and then you've got something happening as a result. And it's got that comma in the middle to signpost the thing that's happening as a result. Something happens, and then there's a result of that thing. So think about that sentence in those two ways, and begin that sentence with before, as, when, because, if. these are our subordinating words. And, you know, by all means, go over this video again and make sure that you're using these subordinating words. So today's lesson has been about how to control the reader, how to make them feel and think. So in Roald Dahl's story, he doesn't use abstract nouns, but he makes the reader feel by creating the conditions of fear. He does that by not using abstract nouns, by not using fear words, but also by using amazing structural devices, really powerful short sentences, lists that bombard the reader, and also conditional sentences that talk about cause and effect. So if you'd like to, you'd be very welcome to produce your own version of this story. Roald Dahl has called it Survival, and you can call your story Survival, and in your story copy as much as you'd like, but experiment with your sentence types. Use short, powerful sentences, use conditional sentences, and use lists. Thanks ever so much for watching. Make sure that you like and subscribe, of course, and that you check out what we're doing on our Facebook Lockdown Lessons Live. Please send in any questions that you've got. We're definitely here to help, and we will see you tomorrow for another lesson. Take care, look after yourselves, and see you soon. Okay, all the best. Bye.